Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Troubleshooting Windows 7 deployments. My name is Ben Hunter. I'm a solution architect in MCS. I've been doing deployment for a long time. I'm trying to think how many years now. 15, 16, 17 years, actually. For the last 17 years now. And for the last 6 months, I've been working with Mike Niehaus and the team building MDT 2012. We have a few screen issues here, so sorry about starting a little bit late there. Okay, so where do we start with Windows 7 deployment? There are lots and lots and lots of ways to deploy Windows 7. There's lots of tools. There's the Wake, there's DISM, there's, as we move to 8, there's ADK. There's all these tools that you need to pull together, ImageX, to make a solution. Now, each of these tools is a moving part. If we've got lots of moving parts, there are lots of opportunities for problems with your deployment, and you need to know what each of these tools underneath MDT, in the example that we'll use a lot, are doing. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is really related to MDT deploying Windows 8, but the logs I'm showing you underneath, all the bits and pieces, are probably the tools you're using, even if you're not using MDT. If you're using the Wake, if you're having troubles joining the domain, that type of thing. So let's look at where we'll start. We start at the top, I guess, from a Microsoft perspective with Configuration Manager as a solution and the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, MDT 2012, MDT 2007, and so on. Now, these sit on top of other services. So WDS, we need to know how to troubleshoot WDS. I need to know how to pronounce it, really. We need to know how to troubleshoot WDS. And then we need to troubleshoot the tools that are underneath WDS. Then once we've got that, there's all of the different levels of control and the scenarios we need to run through. So these are the layers that we're going to look through in today's session. Just find. Sorry, my clicker's gone. Okay, so let's look at the typical deployment errors. These are the kind of things you see a lot of time when you're running a demo with MDT. Sort of thing, you get the salmon screen, pink salmon. If you see this, it's not good. We get the we get the typical sort of error, 804005. Do you guys know what that means? It's bad. An error's occurred. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we'll go through today is how do we work out what those errors are? How do we dive deeper and to understand what's really behind this? And this is what always happens, is myself or Mike Niehaus or somebody on the forums, on my IT forum or the Microsoft forums will post a picture or maybe the error code and say, I got error 804005. Can you help me fix this, please? It's probably there every day, but that's not enough information. We need to dig deeper. You see yourself in error recovery, all that kind of stuff. It's not useful. We need to know what we're talking about. Now, this is going to be my theme today. I'm going to say the word logs. I don't know how many times. It'll be at least 100, probably more. Troubleshooting deployment is all about knowing what logs to look at, knowing how to understand those logs, knowing what errors to look at, knowing what not to look at, because often you'll see a log and there'll be something that looks like an error, and really it's not. The net setup log, for example, domain join stuff, tends to have a lot of stuff that looks like an error, but really isn't. You need to know how to get the error numbers and translate them into something that's useful. One of my favorite ways is just putting in the error number and searching the web. That isn't always useful. And then you need to know the tools to help you actually get to the bottom of this. The tools to help you read the logs, like CMTrace, which is the new version of Trace 32 with Configuration Manager. Okay, and so we'll show you how to work through CMTrace and so on in the session as well. Okay. So when you need to get to the root cause, you need to go to the logs, as I said, but you need to know which logs to get and where they are. Unfortunately, they're not all stored in one folder, in one location. Sometimes the same log can be in multiple different places depending on the phase of the deployment you're in. So often you'll get the message like I showed you, 80045, or you might get even a more useful message, but it's still not enough. Thank you. 2, great. Okay, so you're going to have to go in and dig deeper. And the skills you need, and there's techniques that we'll use during the session to show you how to dive in deeper and how to identify what's there. This deck is actually, it's quite a long deck. It's got a lot of information on it. You can get the deck afterwards, because I'm not going to talk to every point, and it will be a reference for you afterwards. But there is a lot you need to know in a lot of logs, so don't expect to remember every log during the session. Go back and look at the deck, and when you're having a troubleshooting problem, go to the slide, say, I've got a problem joining the domain, go to the join domain slides, and have a look, and that will help you with the troubleshooting. Okay, so as I said, there's lots of logs in different places. You know, DISM creates its own logs, WDS creates its own logs, Config Manager creates its own logs for interacting with WDS. Config Manager has hundreds of log files. The actual Windows itself creates its own log files, so we'll go in and know where to look for each particular scenario. Okay, if you're using MDT, you want to configure a thing called SL Share. SL Share will take those logs that MDT produces and put them up onto a deployment share. And if you enable dynamic logging, it will dynamically update those logs as it's going. So when you have trouble on a client out in the field somewhere or at a site office or wherever it is, you can go and look at those logs and grab them from there and at least get your start. You may then have to delve into other logs on the machine itself, but you'll get a start. So that's a good trick. There's another new feature of MDT 2012 called monitoring. This allows you to actually connect locally to WinPE on a machine, well, at wherever it may be. So you don't need to physically go to the machine to connect to WinPE to figure out what is going wrong. So I'll show you that in a moment as well. So let me just show you a couple of tips with log files. Which screen am I on? Okay, let me just shuffle myself along here. That wasn't good. Okay. Now, that's not what I wanted to see. I need to do some error logging, some troubleshooting on why my MDT server just had a problem there, and I know what it is. I just knocked my drive out when I was moving it along. Okay. I love snapshots. Okay, so my first demo, excuse me. This is what you get for playing around with screen resolution all the way up to the beginning of your session. Okay, so CM Trace. This is perhaps the best tool you will get for dealing with log files. So if I open up my logs here, sorry about the screen resolution, guys, and I go to a log file, so I've got a sample log in here. This is the SMS Pixie log. Now that is opening it in CM Trace. You see things are easy to read. It's highlighting warnings. If I scroll up a little bit, there should be some errors in here. It's highlighting errors. It's pretty easy to at least start finding out what's wrong. Now, if I open the same log file in Notepad, does that look easy to read? Yeah? Alexi can read it easily enough, but the rest of us probably cannot. So you can see the difference. So sometimes you will have to use Notepad, but I tend to put CM Trace everywhere I go. It's on my machines. It's in my WinPE instances. I integrate it into WinPE and so on, because it just makes my life so much easier. So the other thing it does is if you press the N button, it will update live. This is something, obviously, that Notepad doesn't do, but as you're troubleshooting, you can see the log moving up and things happening. That's pretty awesome in my opinion. It's pretty simple, but awesome. So another thing you can do with CM Trace is look up error logs. So what was the error log we had before? What was it? 8004.005. So if I go here, error lookup, I go 8004.005, and we do a lookup. Unspecified error. So, as you can see, it's not always so easy. Now, people make assumptions about what error messages are. People see 8004.005, and they think they're seeing this. Don't just glance at the logs and assume you know what the error message is. Often it's, we get familiar, we think something is just going to be a certain thing, and it's not. So a lot of people look at that 8004.005 and assume it's an access denied error because they see the 5 on the end, and they don't notice the difference with the 4 and the 7. Be careful. Now, another thing we can do here, let me just close that. So if I go to the command prompt, you can use net help message to look up errors. So if we go net help message error 53, this is another common one you'll see. So I've got a different error message, but I'm using the same sort of tool. This is just a conversion to binary from the hex. Now, make sure you know what you're doing. Another example, I think Michael was called out by this one, and he pointed out to me, was net help message 28. And this, he had made a wrong conversion or put the 7 in the wrong place. And it turns out his deployment was broken because the printer was out of paper. So, it's a silly example, but it's an important example and really does get across the point. It's easy to get it wrong. This one's obvious. You'll get it and you'll know that, okay, you've put the wrong thing in. But just make sure you do it the right way. Okay. Let me switch back. Come on, switch to the right screen. The screen switch is a little slow. Okay. So let's just start going through some logs. This is Windows 7 and Windows Vista, and as we go forward, these are probably all going to be the same. So with the setup process, the key logs you want to look at are setupaccount.log and setuperror.log. Generally, you want to start off with setuperror.log because it's a much smaller file, and you'll see what the actual errors are, and you can find them. And then if you need more information, you can dive into the massive log, which is setupaccount.log, and figure out what it is that really went wrong. Sometimes you'll just look in setup error, and most of the time you'll see something very obvious, and you'll be able to troubleshoot it and just move along. But that's not always the case. Okay, so where are you going to find these files? And this you'll see as a common theme. A lot of the time they're not in the same places. Depending on where you are in the deployment process, they could be anywhere, whether you're in WinPE, whether you're in the full OS, whatever it is. Your friend is dir/s. I use it all the time, dir/s, setupaccount.log. It'll find all of the ones, and then I can decide which one I want to use. Even though a lot of the time, I've been doing this for a long time, I generally know where they are, I almost always do dir/s, and then I will navigate through and work out which is the right one. Now, if you really want to know where it is at which phase, you've got the link down here. As I said, with this deck, it's the kind of one you'll want to refer to afterwards. Okay, cbs.log is actually the wrong log there. It's dism.log is the first one. If you're doing dism commands or applying packages offline, for example, which MDT will do for you, if you're applying a language pack and it doesn't work, if you've got a whole bunch of updates and one of them fails, like an MDT, you've imported them and your deployment is falling over and you've just imported 20, it's much easier to look through the dism log and see which one failed than to sort of do process of trial and error, cut out half, is it this half or that half, no, so on and so on. So look in that log. Okay, setup API dev.log, driver installations. Now this can be the bane of your life if sometimes you've got all the drivers, you're not sure what's causing the problem. This is the place to look. Why is my network card not installing? I know I put the right driver on there. I downloaded it from HP or Lenovo's site. I've put it in there and it's still failing. Maybe the wrong driver is being injected, MDT, or the database, or the machine has found another one. Look in this log, it will tell you. Now, netsetup.log, I'll go into this in more detail soon. But this is where you start dealing with domain join issues. If you've specified the wrong OU during deployment, if you've got wrong credentials, if you've got the domain name incorrect, something like that, netsetup.log will help. Of these logs, netsetup.log is the one I use the most. It's the one that causes me the most issues. Maybe I'm just not good at putting in credentials and things like that. But there's opportunities for error there, and we'll go into that in more depth soon. Okay, and finally, Windows update.log. Pretty obvious, really. If you're doing updates from WSUS or from the web or whatever it is that uses Windows Update, this will tell you what's happening there. If your patches aren't installing for some reason, if it's not connecting to WSUS, have a look in there. You get lots of ideas as to what's causing it. Okay, WPE init. This log is good with when you're troubleshooting WinPE. So these are WinPE things. I've actually got an example on here, but when we were building MDT 2012, I was having problems when we were integrating Dart, and things weren't starting up properly, and command prompt windows were staying in the background. The WinPE init.log had that information, so it told me why Dart and why WinPE wasn't behaving correctly. So have a look in there. And setup API, dev, it's the same drivers, but within WinPE. Okay, WDS. Who here loves troubleshooting WDS? I got one hand. Put it the other way around. So WDS, it can be hard to troubleshoot by default. Why is it not answering? What's causing my problems? Could it be a switch issue? Is DHCP causing a problem? Have I not configured WDS correctly? Is the boot image not on there? There's all sorts of things that can cause problems. And WDS doesn't have logging enabled by default. So what you do is you enable WDS tracing within the registry. This article here, the KB, details how to do it. It's very simple. And then that will create this WDS server.log. So enable tracing, restart it, and you'll start getting good logging. And that's really helpful. It deals with all sorts of problems. I'm starting to feel like I've talked about how many logs now? This must be up to about 20 or 30. And I guess as I talk about it, I kind of reiterate the point. There's so many moving parts in deployment. There's not just one log you have to go to. There are just lots and lots of logs. Okay, so USMT, there's these 4 key logs. The one I use the most, I guess, is the USMT capture and USMT restore logs. If there's an error, there's actually pretty good logging in there. You'll be surprised at the amount of information you find. And then, if you want to get deeper into the errors, you can look in the USMT capture PRG and USMT state restore PRG. So have a look in there. We also create a USMT log, estimate log in MDT, but I've not really needed to use that very often. The estimate's a pretty basic process. Okay, more logs. I think I'll spend a while on the screen. So smsts.log, when you're deploying with MDT, with Configuration Manager and MDT, this is the log that's pretty much the heart of all sorts of problems. You need to know how to use this log. And this is one of those logs where you really need CM trace. It records all the things that the task sequence has done and whether things were set successfully or not. I should try not to hit myself. Okay, so this is very much a classic case of the log moving around. You can see all the locations I have here. If you're in WinPE, it will move around in there. It could be in the SMS folder. It could be in all sorts of locations. If you are in Windows, it's also in different locations. So at each phase, you've got to know to use the dir/s that I mentioned before. But besides using that, you need to know, is it on C? Is it on D? Is it on X? If I'm in WinPE and I've got multiple partitions, you don't know where the drive letters are. So where are you going to look? So you've got to figure out or look across multiple drives. I often start up diskpart and do a list vol so I know the drives that I have. and then I start looking across the drives to figure out where it's put it. It could be on X in the RAM drive and all sorts of different locations. So look around, it's in different locations. Install cmtrace in your WinPE, because then you can use it within WinPE to help you read those as well. MDT will let you add extra files. So you can, say, point to a folder where extra files are located and just dump cmtrace into that folder, and it will automatically integrate it into WinPE for you. Okay. So now on to my favorite part, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. In my opinion, everyone should be using MDT to deploy, whether it be with Config Manager or by itself. But then I've spent a lot of time working on it as well. So MDT, every MDT script generates a log file, which goes into the mini-nt folder structure. So each of those scripts then folds up into one major script called bdd.log. There are a couple of exceptions, logs that get quite large that we don't really want to fold up into one, but all of the major scripts are in bdd.log. So when you get an error caused by MDT, you can open up bdd.log and look up, find where the error is, and then generally, even in most cases, you'll see, okay, I'll look up, okay, it's a domain join issue. Then you'll go across and look at the domain joining logs like netsetup.log and work out what is causing that. So these logs also can be in different locations. For example, when there's no disk partitions on a disk, we'll put it on X in the RAM drive. We then move it across to C drive so it survives during the deployment process when the RAM drive in WinPE closes down. So it's generally much easier to find. I generally just, if I'm in WinPE, I'll go to X mini-nt SMS OSD OSD logs. If I have a C drive, I go there. Okay, I'm hoping we're just about at some more demos because we need to break up all these log files. Okay, Configuration Manager. There's lots of Configuration Manager logs. These logs are the ones that are particularly related to the deployment of Windows. It's an art form in itself, understanding the Config Manager logs and where to go and when. So I'm not going to cover everything about Config Manager logs, but some key ones. Drivercatalog.log. When you're importing drivers and you start having duplicate drivers into Configuration Manager, so you're creating a driver package for your new model and you've got to figure out which ones weren't imported properly, and there's that whole awkward process. If you look in drivercatalog.log, it will show you the errors that are there. Now, this is not a problem in 2012 anymore, but in 2007, that would be very useful. When you've got issues with task sequences on the server itself, when you're building them, task sequence provider.log is handy as well. smspixie.log, this is very useful. I will demonstrate some of this, and we had some labs or instructor labs earlier today where we included this as part of the labs in troubleshooting smspixie, because this is the cause of a lot of problems. As I said, like the Config Manager Pixie service sits on top of WDS, which sits on top of everything else in Windows. So you've got layers to troubleshoot, and knowing how to troubleshoot the SMS Pixie service is important. I still say SMS. I know it's still stuck in my head because of the way they name the log files, but I'll call it the Config Manager Pixie service now. Okay, obviously, like I said, this is a reference deck. If you want more information, head to that link. Magic keystrokes. So if you don't know what F8 does in WinPE, you really do need to know. So if you have a problem in WinPE and the machine crashes, a lot of the time you'll deploy, it will fail, and then it will just reboot, and you don't know what happened. If you press F8 in WinPE, it will not reboot until you close the command prompt that was brought up by the F8 window, by the F8 key press. This is really, really useful, especially when you're troubleshooting Configuration Manager deployments, because often it will fail and then it will just restart. And so you don't know what it is. So if you press F8, even if you've walked off and you're just testing and you come back half an hour later, it will still be sitting there. You can then go and look at the logs, like the smsts.log is the first place you would look, and go and see what's there. Now, to enable this functionality, it's enabled by default in MDT. In Config Manager, you have to tick the box to enable command prompt support. In MDT 2012, we do that by default. So if you don't want it, you'd have to untick it. Now, sometimes when you're in the Windows setup phase, F8 won't work, but you can type Shift F10, and it will bring up the command prompt. So the command prompt is definitely your friend here. Okay. Let's switch back. So I'm going to show a couple of things quickly here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start up a machine. So I want to show you the remote monitoring component. Where are we? Find the mouse. So I've got a machine here, which I didn't catch fast enough. So I've got a machine. I'm going to boot it to WinPE. I've locked my mouse in there. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to start up MDT. And in here, I have a section called monitoring. Now, monitoring, I have integrated. So in MDT, if you have Dart, I mentioned before, if you have access to Dart, you can integrate it into MDT, and it will allow you to remote monitor WinPE. So in the background here, let's see what's going on. I've got my environment built that I'm going to deploy to. The first thing I want to show you is you'll notice down here it says an existing deployment is in progress. Would you like to ignore it? This is a new feature in MDT 2012. What happens is in MDT, if sometimes a deployment will fail, and when you go to restart that deployment, the leftover mess from the old deployment will break your next deployment. And we would say to people, okay, what you do is you boot up into WinPE, press F8, go in and delete the mini-NT folder that's storing all the mess. So now what we've done in MDT 2012 is we try and put steps through there so we know when it is dirty. So if you restart, it will detect that it was halfway through a process and it shouldn't be in WinPE at the moment, and will give you this warning. So if you're really brave, you could hit no. I wouldn't recommend that. If this has come up, there's a problem, and you should probably look at why your task sequence has got an issue. Perhaps an app rebooted when it shouldn't have rebooted, or something happened. So I'll click, yes, I'd like to restart. So now we're cleaning up in the background, and it's going to boot. Now this is the environment I was talking about earlier on that is broken. You notice that WinPE init is there. That screen shouldn't be there. And if I press F8, nothing happens. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just start a deployment. And you'll notice down in the bottom corner here, there's a little window that's not normally there. This is the Dart integration within WinPE. What Dart would ask you to do normally is you would ring the people and they would tell you, I've got this ticket number, here's my IP addresses, and this is the port. Then you would go into the Dart tool and you would say, you would type in that information, and then you would get remote control of the machine. So that's a bit of a laborious process. So what we can do, and what we've done with MDT, is we've passed that back automatically via a web service. If I just refresh here, there's my machine running. I can see the phase and so on. If I scroll down and get a scroll bar here, sorry about that. I can see how many steps it's gone through, none at the moment because we haven't gone through the wizard at all, and so on. So what I can do then is I can right-click on this and go Properties, and you'll see down here I have Dart Remote Control. If I click this, it takes a few seconds. It will bring up the remote control, and there we go. You can see this. I can now have control of this. Yes, question? Yes, you can do the same from Configuration Manager console. or no, from Configuration Manager, you'd still need the MDT console, but you would have to manually integrate the Config Manager components into WinPE. So we can go through that later on, but yes, it's possible. It's just we've not automated it. Okay, so that's Dart integration. So we've seen the dirty environment there, we've seen Dart. The one other thing I mentioned was the WinPE init here. So if I cancel out, so I actually can, let me just, actually now I've lost control. Let me just disconnect my remote control here because it's going to cause me issues because I now have control. I'll drop that off. I'll come over here. I'm just going to cancel out of my wizard. Let me just make this a bit bigger. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, why is this box appearing in the background? If I go dir/s wp-init.log. Did I get that right? I added. So it's in the same folder. You see I did the dir/s. We do Notepad, so I'm not practicing what I preach here. I haven't integrated CM trace. So, and if I go down here, I'll see an error. Unattended failed. So what it did is it didn't integrate the unattend file that WinPE uses when it boots, so it didn't boot up correctly. And then that would give me some indications that my packages didn't synchronize up correctly or didn't import correctly. So this is one I've seen. If I update my WinPE boot share, create another image, it will just work. I left it for this example. Okay. Just because everyone loves slides, I'm going to switch back. Okay. What I'm going to run through now is a bunch of sort of the common errors you are going to see and what the cause of those errors is. As Mike calls this, how to shoot yourself in the foot. Okay. So one of the first ones here is it couldn't parse the unattend file. So you get, this is a really common error. You get into the Windows setup phase, Windows setup just starts, and then this box pops up. Generally, it's as a result of something that shouldn't be in the unattend.xml in there. Perhaps the computer name is too long. You know, it's more than 15 characters, and you edited it manually, because MDT will stop you doing more than 15 characters. Perhaps there's an invalid character in there. It could be any sort of problem. But if you see RC equals 31 in there, you want to start looking at your unattend.xml file. What is it in there that's not right? So a common example is somebody does something like they put the serial, they want the serial number to be the computer name. I don't know if you've looked at the serial number on a virtual machine, but it's like this long. So things like that will cause you issues. So bad computer name, very common. If you see that, this is most likely what the problem is. Now, this is one I see all the time as well. Often you'll deploy, and people will do things like they'll put the KMS key in. So when you go to the MDT wizard and it puts it in, the KMS key will be in there. Or they've got a key that's for the wrong version. It's the professional key trying to install Enterprise. And what Windows does is it's intelligent. It doesn't give you a message that's going to be that logical, but it's intelligent. It looks at your product key, and then it filters out the things it displays based on that product key. So if it finds the product keys for professional, and you are installing an enterprise version or vice versa, it's going to filter them and will show you nothing. So if you know you have the image, fix the product key if you know it's wrong, or just remove it, and then it will go through this. You'll have to provide a key later on, but you've probably got the wrong P, you've probably got a KMS, or you've probably mismatched. So I see that. I don't know how often I see this, but it's a lot. This is one of the most common Windows setup failures I see. And it's frustrating because you know it's there and you don't know exactly why. Broken domain join. This is also, maybe the other one was one of the second most common I see, because this is the most common. There's all sorts of problems here. One is when people join the domain first, so they run an unattend XML and then try and change the computer name later on. That's not going to work. I actually had a customer email me on Friday as I was reviewing this deck with this exact problem. They weren't using MDT, so that's probably the main issue. But, so they were editing their unattend.xml. They were deploying, and then as they were coming up, they were changing the name. At this stage, it had joined the domain. The machine had, when they changed the name, it broke the domain connectivity. So that's a common issue. Now, you can get around it. You can rename it and then use a netdom command to join later on. With an MDT, there is a command that you can run called recover the domain. So you can use that process as well. Or you can build an unattend file with all the information in it right at the beginning, rather than having the computer name missing and prompting the user for it later. So that's why we do it in MDT this way. If you've got the problem, don't try and give the computer name later on after it's joined the domain. Okay. So the deployment all worked. This is the other side of the OS issues, or the domain join issues. It worked, but it's not joined the domain. You get this yellow screen at the end, and you're not sure why. Now, generally with this, there can be a bunch of issues. For example, the one we've got here is cn equals computers, dc equals domain, dc equals.com, or com. You can't, computers is actually not an OU. That's the default OU it will go into. You can't specify it. Or even if you get another OU and it's wrong. Or a lot of times I see people just put like cn equals workstations, and they don't put the domain information on the end. That will also fail. So you need to actually lay out the text properly. Yeah, if you want it to go to computers, leave it blank. There we go. There's another net help message that Mike had that's not printer is out of paper. It's invalid domain. And so what we need to do is, when you get these kind of issues, you're going to have to dive into the netsetup.log file to figure out what's going on. And I'll go through that in just a moment for you. Another common issue is you join the domain, but it doesn't end up in the right OU. Often you'll have a machine you're rebuilding or doing a refresh type deployment on, and you want to keep the same name. Now that machine is in one OU, and during the deployment, you specify a different OU, it will not move to the new OU. Or perhaps you're rebuilding that machine, and the account that you're rebuilding with doesn't even have rights to the existing machine, so it can't move it either way. Sometimes you're going to need to move the computers. I know a lot of companies, most people, they will move, when they're moving from one OS to another, they will put them in different OUs and apply different group policies. You don't want your XP group policies applying to your Windows 7 machines or vice versa. So people deal with that sometimes by using a different OU. Other times they'll use WMI filters, so that's another option there. You could move it in the OU as well. You could move it during the deployment process, so you could have it in the OU and then move the object. Now, a long time ago, I blogged on how to do that from within WinPE. I don't recommend doing it that way, because PFE don't like me for blogging about that stuff. It's possible, but it's actually not the best way of doing it anymore. You can use a web service, perhaps, to do it, and there's great content out there by a guy called Mike Koster. His name is spelled M-A-I-K, Koster, K-O-S-T-E-R. That shows you how to do that using a web service, and he's provided all the bits for you as well, so it's very useful. Okay. So sometimes you'll be deploying and you'll see this screen. You know, you've had a blue screen and it's immediately rebooted into this. And then it might blue screen around. Often, well, the most common cause of this is a 7B error. That means you don't have a mass storage device. Generally, you'll find you're going along fine, all your machines are deploying, then you get the latest machine from Lenovo or whoever it is, and they've got the new Intel chipset in it. And that's got a new mass storage driver. So you don't really know about it until the first time you go to deploy. Maybe you're in WinPE, and you boot up and it can't see the disk. Or you've got past that, but you're deploying, it installs in WinPE, restarts, and then it can't see the disk. And it will blue screen with 7B. So if you see 7B, It's a pretty easy fix. Just add your mass storage drivers in, recreate your WinPE, and your deployment should work. Generally, you find you don't have to do it that often. I find that, every 6 months you might have to update it, but usually it's all the same sort of chipset on the machine, so you're pretty safe most of the time. But it will catch you out eventually, especially when in XP, anyone deploying XP will know the pain that is mass storage drivers. I know I wrote a blog post probably in 2007 about that, and it's I think the second most popular blog post on our entire blog. It's massive. The only one more so is some videos Richard did on MDT. If your machine is automatically restarting and you just can't see what that error is, often as you're deploying, you can mount the Hive and change the registry key here so it doesn't auto-reboot. Then it will stop at that blue screen and you can figure out what's going on. I know I've often restarted and then watched really intently to see if I can catch it, and it's restart, 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 and hopefully it imprints on my mind as to what that actually is. But it doesn't work very well and you can get frustrated pretty quick. There's articles on all these things here. I'm not going to go through all the details, but have a look at those articles. Sometimes as well, a driver can be marked as, for example, supporting x64, and we will inject it, but it really doesn't. So occasionally that's a problem if you see the 359 error there. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of Windows setup failures. Okay, so this is what we were looking at before. I wonder if this will work. View, full screen. That's better. Okay. So this is the standard kind of thing. Yellow screen, failed to join the domain. It says 4 times there by default, MDT. If it can't join the domain, we'll restart the machine and try again, and it will keep doing it 4 times. So that's what that's all about. So who remembers, what log was it that we need to go and look at? Yeah, net setup. So Windows, debug. I know where this one is, so I'm navigating straight to it. Net setup.log. Actually, it's probably better for me not to do that, but that's okay. Okay, so if we start looking at net setup, this is actually a log that you can read without needing CMtrace. It's pretty good. And we scroll down. I've made this error very deliberate. I know you called wrong OU. But so we've scrolled down, and you've got to start looking, and okay, so something's valid, net join domain status. If I go down here somewhere, it validates it, and somewhere in here, often it's you can't see it. It will say I can't find the correct OU. Now, this is what I mean by sometimes you have to go through in detail. So LDAP creation failed. This essentially means that it can't find the OU. So there we go, highlighted. So you scroll down, there's a lot of stuff in here. Sometimes with these logs, it's very much, this is one of the harder logs to decipher in my opinion. So you have to look through closely, especially when you've got issues like DNS resolution issues, that type of thing. It will be harder. So just pay a lot of attention. You see it took me a few seconds to find something I knew I was looking for. So go and have a close look through. You'll see it's quite a long log because what it's doing is it's repeating itself 4 times. So, and more. So it gives you lots and lots of detail. Okay. So I'll switch out of there for a moment and then I'll come back to it. WinPE. Now this is since the XP days, it's got a lot easier. WinPE was for those of you who were deploying it in the BDD days and deploying to XP, this was the hardest part of deployment in my opinion. So often you'll get something like you'll boot up and it can't connect to the share. This is the typical sort of thing. You've got another like the mass storage drivers, you've got another hardware type. It's booted up. Why am I not connecting to the share? So the first thing we want to do is press F8, type ipconfig and see what comes up. If you've got if there's nothing there, your NIC's probably not installed. Then you might want to dive down into the logs and see if the drivers are working, or you just know, okay, this is a new machine, I don't have the driver, I'm going to go get it and put it into WinPE. Then once you've got the driver, sometimes you might not get an IP address. There's a standard things, is DHCP working? A common one is with Cisco switches. I don't see this as much anymore, but portfast needs to be enabled. I've seen people waste days trying to figure out why they're not getting an IP address on WinPE, just to find that it was a switch setting. So that's one, you're probably less likely to see it now. Sometimes within WinPE as well, you might get name resolution issues, so double check, make sure your DNS works, ping your deployment share, do NS lookup to make sure it's working. Those are all common types of problems. Okay. Let's dive back in here. Press the right button. Don't want you. Don't want you. Anyway, let's go to full screen. Okay. So what I want to do is show you some WDS troubleshooting. For those who did the advanced lab before, this will probably remind you of what you've just done. Okay, so in this example, I have a Pixie machine, which I'll just pull over here. This machine is booting up. It'll start doing this and it just freezes. Nothing's happening. Eventually it will time out. Now with Config Manager 2012 and with 2007, you need to make sure you have the right boot images and WDS set up correctly for Config Manager. Otherwise, you're going to get problems. Now, and it's very particular about what you need to do. So let me just show you what's happening in the background here. I'm going to use cmtrace, and I'm going to go to the SMS Pixie log. So if we scroll down here, the first thing to do is you've got to go to the Config Manager logs. You don't go up here and go into the logs. You need to go down here into SMS CCM and into logs there. Now if I scroll down a bit, I'll open up the SMS Pixie log. Now what we can see here is we can see it's not got the boot architecture found. So what we need to do is understand why this is the case. With Config Manager Pixie, it needs a boot image for both architectures, x86 and x64. So even if you're deploying an x86 OS, you still need to have a boot image for x64, because what the Pixie server will do is suck out the boot files for x64 and use that to bootstrap itself. So within Config Manager, there's a couple of things you need to do. First of all, you have to have your distribution point enabled as a Pixie distribution point now. Then you need to get your boot image. You need to put it on the distribution point, which I've already done. And you need to go in and say, this image needs to be deployed from Pixie, or can be deployed. Now if I go back into the background here, give it a moment. This is going to take probably 20 seconds. What it will do is it will detect that architecture and it's going to start pulling down the files. And if I leave it long enough, which is probably about 2 minutes by the time it does all this, it's going to start. So here we go. You can see it's noticed there's a change. It's noticed there's the boot image here. It's now integrating and pulling out those boot files. It's dropping it on the Pixie service point first. So I'm not going to run through all this because it's 2 minutes of watching a log file scroll, which I'm sure you all don't want to see. But eventually, we'll be able to boot to that machine. The reason I show you that is because most people setting up Config Manager 2012, the first thing they're going to do is stand up a virtual machine, put DHCP and AD on it, and then put Config Manager 2012 and try and deploy an image and deploy some apps and so on. I don't know how many times I've seen on the forums people make this exact mistake, not put the right images on. But you need to, excuse me, you need to make sure they're there. So hopefully this will save you a lot of time. And what I'm wanting to show you is just a demonstration of how you can troubleshoot those logs. Okay. Switch back. Okay, let's go through a few common issues that we see with the deployment toolkit. One common one is people get their image. So let's say you've built your own image manually, which I always recommend you automate the building of your images, but sometimes you can't. Maybe you've got a machine that you just need to take a copy of, and you want to grab that machine, take an image, and deploy it. So you get the image, you drop it down, you pull it into the MDT console, and you go to deploy it. But it reboots, and the task sequence never restarts. We see this quite a lot as well, and the cause of this issue is that the machine wasn't sysprepped. You never deploy a machine that isn't sysprepped. Unless you're deploying it just to the same device over and over, then it might be okay, but you don't need MDT then. So you need to make sure it's sysprepped. And logging in manually won't help, and so on. So the key thing I ask you here is, if you're capturing an image, always sysprep it. Use an automated process to build your images as well if you can. There's a session that Richard delivered, which obviously you'll be able to watch later on, that shows how to do image engineering with MDT. He did that a couple of hours ago. So go online and have a look at that if it's new to you. So this is one that's not relevant to 2012 anymore. But since most people are probably using 2010 at the moment, it's still relevant for you. Task sequence fails, as I mentioned before. It leaves behind files, causing a dirty environment, and you have issues. I'll demonstrate some of what this causes in a minute. What you really need to go in, delete that mini-nt folder, and sometimes the _SMS task sequence, especially if config manager falls over. So learn how to manually remove, boot to WinPE, go in and remove them. If you've still got an OS, you can just go in and remove them there. I don't know how much time I've wasted myself doing this. I should know better, but I still forget occasionally. There's the dirty environment that we all saw before. Okay, this is one that is also a thing that's relevant to MDT 2010 and is not so relevant to MDT 2012 anymore. With MDT 2010, it will go through, and when you're going to deploy an image, let's say you've got your custom image, you create a deployment share, and you go to deploy it. What MDT will do is look for the setup files to perform the deployment. If it doesn't find them in the same folder as the WIM file, what it's going to do is look through all the other operating systems and find one that matches and use those. However, if you don't have a match, you're going to get this error. So that's MDT 2010. As it says here, MDT always uses setup.exe, but it doesn't anymore. In 2012, what MDT will do is it will try and use DISM. ImageX. DISM will be replacing ImageX soon. So it's going to try and use ImageX to deploy it. And that will actually work pretty well. The only time it won't work is if you're trying to deploy a x86 image from x64. It works the other way around. You can deploy, if you're booting to an x86 image in WinPE, you can deploy x86 and x64. If you boot to x64, you can only do x64. And actually, MDT won't even display the x86 options then. So it will try and help you. But if you've automated everything and skipped past all the screens, it will still do it, and you will get this error. So key learnings here. MDT 2012 fixes a lot of the little things that we had there before. So that's really the learning rather than anything here. Okay, so this is an error that I've kind of talked about a lot already. It could mean anything. It just means that it's failed. But common things, there are some common things that cause this. Things like, if you want to run a batch file and you don't put cmd/c on the front of that batch file, it won't run and you'll get this error. Because it doesn't know what operator to use. If you're running a script like a VB script, you've got to put C script on the front of that. So, MSU files without the proper command line on the end or whatever it is. You should go into sms.ts.log and finish and find what that is. It's very useful, sms.ts.log, and at least it will point you in the right direction. It doesn't mean access denied, as we've talked about already. Okay, this is another one that I see quite a lot. So when you're in the MDT console and you click edit unattend.xml file, what it's going to do in the background is it's going to generate a catalog so it knows what it can edit for you. So, what options it can provide in the system image manager when you're editing unattend.xml. You cannot generate a catalog on the opposite OS. So if you go to x64, you can only generate the catalog on x64, on an x64 OS. So if you've got MDT installed on your server, which you probably have, and you hit the button, you'll be able to edit the x64 images, but not x86. The only way around this, well, this never causes me an issue because I don't edit the unattend.xml file. I always automate the changes through MDT to, that I would otherwise manually do in the unattend. So MDT can do that for you. If you needed to do editing the unattend.xml file with x86, just stand up a copy of MDT or the wake, on an x86 machine. So it's a bit awkward, a bit of a pain, but it really doesn't cause many issues. So, and there's not a way around it. It's by design. Yeah, or you can edit manually, which isn't that hard. It can be dangerous, but you'll find out if it's broken because when you go to test your deployment, you'll get that error that we saw before. There's something wrong with your unattend. And if you're doing it at the time, you'll soon know that there's something wrong. So small changes, that might be the easiest way to do it. Editing XML manually can be a problem if you're new to it anyway. Okay, let's have a look at a few common issues with Config Manager. So there's a lot of slides in this deck, but and it's a lot of hard work to get through sometimes, but I think it's the kind of deck that will be useful for you in your real life and your real deployment, so hopefully it is useful. Okay, so often you'll see this failure, 804005. Doesn't mean access denied, as we said again. It just means there's an error. Same as MDT. Go and look in sms.ts.log, figure out what caused the problem. What I tend to do is I go to the bottom, because usually the error is near the bottom, and I start scrolling up. And I'll find, look, there's an error, and then go up a little bit more and find the detail. Just standard troubleshooting techniques on logs. Use Trace32 because the config manager logs are much more readable that way. Okay, so if you install Windows and you find it's running from D, that's because you took the WIM file and you just grabbed the WIM file only and imported it as an operating system. The WIM file that came from the media, install.wim. The reason it goes to D is because of the way Microsoft, when we created the media, we did the image capture on a machine that was on a D drive. So MDT, that's not a problem if you use the normal setup files, but if you try to use setup files, or if you try and do it directly from the install.wim, this is the problem. So just don't import install.wim is generally my advice, although we've fixed it in MDT 2012. So my general advice is don't import install.wim. If you're going to import media, pull in everything. If you're going to do a customized OS, then you can just pull that in. Config Manager OS deployment, hash mismatch. Now, I've been working with Config Manager 2012 for quite a while now, building the MDT tools and testing and that kind of thing. I actually haven't seen hash mismatch once. I don't know if it's gone away or what they've done, but it's great. I haven't seen it. So, admittedly, I'm not working in complicated multi-site environments. I'm just working in a test lab. So, but if you're on 2007, you're likely to see this. It happens. Usually it's because somebody at a site it just does it. Sometimes it just gets a hash mismatch. There's no real explanation. But sometimes people will edit files at the site, or they try and play with something. And so when it goes to deploy, it checks the files, and if the hash doesn't match, it's not going to deploy. And it will fall over right at the beginning. You'll go through, you'll select, if you were manually selecting your task sequence, you'd select it, and then it would fall over as it checks all the hashes. This is one where if you're not sure which package it is that's causing the problems, you can just dive in, you can press F8 at that stage, go into the smsts.log, and it will show you which one was the problem, and then you can resynchronize that out to the site. So just push it back out again. That should fix it. It's a pretty easy fix, but it can be quite annoying. Another one is packages aren't available. This is another, what you get is you've got your task sequence. Your task sequence refers to, let's say, 20 packages. Things like apps, boot images, that kind of stuff. So we've got all our packages, but we didn't synchronize them all out to the location we're at, the local DP, or we haven't even pushed them all out at all. When we start the deployment, it's going to do the same thing like with the hash mismatch. It's going to look through all the packages and make sure it's got them all before it deploys. What you don't want to happen is it to get halfway through the deployment and find it's missing one package, and you've got a machine that's sort of half-baked, or it's just been formatted and then nothing else has happened. So it will check. So go to the log again. I say logs every time, smsts.log, scroll up, find the one that it says I can't find, and then push it out. Generally, it will give you the package ID. You just find the matching one. With Config Manager 2012, my favorite feature by far is the option to distribute content. So if you right-click on a task sequence, hit Distribute Content, it will do all packages that are associated with that task sequence. You don't have to manually go through each one. That's just, to me, it's wonderful. It's just so good. I'm easily pleased, though. We've kind of been through this. I've already showed the demo for this, but you'll see all sorts of Pixie errors. The ones I showed you before with 2012, but you'll get DHCP configuration issues. So in your lab, if you do like a lot of people do, have DHCP and WDS on the same box, make sure you tick the options. If you right-click the WDS server, there's the 60 and 67 port options. Make sure you tick those, then it will work. But just there's a whole list of things here, unknown computer support, that kind of thing. Is it advertised correctly, and so on. So there are a bunch of issues. You can refer back to this. There's more, and there's lots of things. There's lots of articles and so on. So just go through this, go through the log files I showed you, enable tracing to look at WDS server, look at SMS Pixie, and you'll get information. I showed you one example, but there are other issues that can cause problems. As we got here, it's the subtle things sometimes that you need to find. So you need to know where to look, and then look for subtle details. I've done that one already, so I'll skip past it. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of simple troubleshooting techniques that will help you troubleshoot your deployment and hopefully speed along your troubleshooting process. There's a few little tricks. I'll show you how to restart a task sequence, show you how to build a special application install task sequence, and how to test the gather process. Okay. That. Okay, so when you're doing NDT deployment, probably the heart of NDT deployment is the custom settings.ini file. And what you're likely to do is you're likely to go through and make changes and want to test them quickly and see if the thing you've done is actually working. So let me just show you a quick trick. Okay. So I've got a deployment share here on ccolon deployment share. And in there is the scripts folder. And what we run is a script called, actually, it's going to take me a long time to tab through that, is ztigather.wsf. This is the script that goes through and works out all the NDT variables and populates things and gets things like the network card details, the IP address, the computer name, the existing computer name, all sorts of stuff, and then runs through the custom settings.ini file where you've specified the rules for MDT. So I've got gather here, and now I can specify an ini file. So I've got my test ini file here, which is in // . So it's in there. And did I type something wrong? So this is my first error. I've tried to run the script without putting C script on the beginning. That wasn't intended, but it's a good demo. Okay, so if I run that now, you can see what it's doing is it's going through and processing the ini file. Now I've obviously got a typo here. What's that? There we go. See? That was another purposeful thing. So it's going through. At the top, you'll see it's collected a bunch of information. I'll go back and show you that in a moment. Now, what it's doing now is it's trying to connect to a database. So I've got an MDT database, so I'm going to connect to it. So it's asking me for credentials to connect to that database. That's probably an indication that you might want to change your custom settings.ini to automatically provide this stuff. But I'll enter it. And I've got an error. My path is not valid. So I've got an issue in my custom settings.ini file. So I'll cancel out of there. Cancel out of there because I know I'm going to get the same error. And if I scroll up, let me grab my scroll bar. Go down a little bit. Hang on. So, where are we? It's saying it's trying to validate the connection here to deploy share. Now that's actually the wrong variable, the wrong value. So I immediately know I've got an issue. I'll go into my demos, and I can edit that file and try the process again. So here, this is a value for connecting to the database. And let me run that script again. Now what I've just done here is I'll put in my credentials. I did something bad. If we go up here, you see it's not returning any of my variables from the database. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff. There would be lines of information there, but it's not returned it. So what I've forgotten to do here is I forgot to delete the mini-nt folder. Because I'm doing this directly, I've not gone and run through the dirty share process. So if I go rd:/mini-nt, I've deleted that folder, I run my script again, put in my credentials, and it should go and get the information that I want. So if we see there, it's collected all sorts of extra information that wasn't there before. And that's sometimes it's not obvious. If things aren't happening, the first thing you want to do is go and delete that mini-nt folder. Now the last thing I want to show you quickly is testing application installs. So in my deployment share here, no, that's not my deployment share, that's Config Manager. It all looks the same to me. I've got a bunch of apps I've created, and I want to test this installation. So I've automated it, created a silent install command line, but I don't want to run a whole deployment just to see if this one app works. So what you can do is create a task sequence that just installs apps for test purposes. So I just call this test. Test app install, and go next. What you do is select this custom task sequence. And now if I go and have a look in this task sequence, all it does is, it's going to take a little while to populate that, is it's only got an install application command line. And what it will do is it will pop up the wizard, and you can select the app in the list, and it will install that. So if I go and then manually run that, so the first thing I'm going to do is rd, because it will cause me problems if I don't do that. Do C script. What am I doing? See, I didn't go to scripts. This is why I usually do this. And I run lighttouch.wsf. That's really the heart of running MDT. So I'll run that. I wouldn't recommend doing this on your server normally, but it's going to go through my custom settings.ini file. You would probably run this on a client. And there's my test app install. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to install this, and then I'll begin. Now I can test it. If it doesn't work, I can test it again. If it doesn't work, I can test it again until I get it right. One other trick is if you've run that gather process, all of the MDT environment variables are in are available. So if you run another script that refers to those environment variables, it will work, and you can run scripts directly. So I won't hit begin there because I will destroy my environment, or at least install Acrobat. So those are a couple of examples. Those are just little tricks that you can use to make your life a little easier. Okay, so where do I get more information about MDT? Obviously, get a copy of this deck. It will be available. Become a fan of MDT on Facebook. It's a fairly active page there, so you'll get information there. If you really can't get through some of the other things like the forums or the MyOT forum mailing list, which is very good, you can use customer support. They will ask you for those logs, though. So they'll say, give me the mini-NT folder in the logs, give me the net setup log, give me the SMSTS log. So they'll ask you for all the stuff that we've talked about so they can do the process that I've just showed you. So get in there, become a fan. The forums are really, really good. And there's a lot of people on there just waiting to answer your questions. I'm amazed by how good the community is on this thing. So quick review. Hopefully I've showed you some of the logs and given you a start with learning how to resolve these issues yourself. It's not trivial, and you probably won't remember them all. I still go back to my deck to say which one was it that caused the problem, this problem. So use it as a reference. I almost need to write a blog that has all this stuff on, I think. So the logs do contain the information, as I'll say, logs, logs, logs. No related content. Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope you'll find it useful.